So here's where I currently am with my Monster Clay sculpture that I've been posting short updates on recently. It's coming along fairly well, although I am slightly worried it's beginning to look a little bit like Ralph Fiennes. Wasn't my intention, it's just sort of gone that way. I've been paying a fair amount of attention to the texture on this sculpture. My previous sculpture, which was a steampunk astronaut, was a 1:1 scale bust, and I spent quite a lot of time trying to get the skin texture of that sculpture correct. Now this guy is about 2/3, 1/2 scale, something like that, so obviously the skin texture detail is going to be much finer simply because he's a lot smaller. Nevertheless, I think I do want to put it in there. Ultimately, I'm going to cast this guy up in silicon, so although this skin texture will be transferred across, because the silicon will be translucent, it won't look quite as strong as it does here. So I think it's worth doing just to give it a degree of realism, but it will hopefully look a little bit more subtle in the final piece. For quite a while the sculpture wasn't quite looking right to me and I wasn't quite sure what it was. After a while though, I've sort of come upon the idea that I think the cheekbones are sticking out a little bit too much. So although it's not always a great idea to start hacking bits off when you're this far through a sculpture, if there's something obviously wrong to it then you do need to deal with it. So as you can see here, I'm using a razor blade to shave down the cheekbones slightly and hopefully get a slightly more realistic look. I noticed that the cheekbones were sort of sticking out a little bit too far, so it just gave it a sort of maybe a slightly comic book look. So slimming them down I think has really helped. I also thought that maybe the nose was a little bit too big and sticking out a little bit too far. And with noses there's quite a degree of variance in the size and the shape of noses, so you can in a sense do whatever you like, but I wanted to bring it in slightly and maybe make it a little bit less big, so I'm just cutting that down as well. As I mentioned in the previous video, I'm thinking this may be a statue of a steampunk adventurer type chap. So to that end I've actually pulled out some pieces from a sculpture I made some years back. These are Chavan oil clay hands which were originally attached to this sculpture, which I made a good few years back now, but these have been sitting in a box for quite a while. They're a little bit battered, but it shouldn't take too long for me to get them back into something a little bit more complete. Now the thing is, I made this guy at about the same scale as the current sculpture I'm making, so the size of the hand is about right for someone of this scale. So what I'm thinking is the guy could be holding his hand in front of him perhaps as though he was halfway through moving or defending himself in some way. Now obviously this hand's in a bit of disrepair, but I don't think that's going to matter too much. I mentioned in the previous video that I think I may cover this guy in steampunk clothing and costume pieces. So I'm thinking I may just make the basic shape of the hand and then cover it in leather and gadgets and things like that. So it only really needs to have the basic shape rather than having all of the skin detail and that sort of thing. So that's it so far. I think what I'm going to be doing next is actually sculpting up a torso and shoulders for this guy. Now I don't have enough monster clay to do that, but luckily I do have a ton of Chavan, so I'm going to build a wooden frame, I think, maybe bulk that out with some foil or tissue paper, and then cover that in Chavan oil clay, just sculpting the basic shape of the form. Like I said, he will be wearing a costume, so I don't need to actually go into the detail of that, but I do just need the basic shapes. Anyway, that's it. So for the time being, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.